In the last video, we looked at the Communist Manifesto and Marx and Engels' topology of how the bourgeois revolution would take place. In this video, we're going to look at some of Karl Marx's historical analysis of an actual bourgeois revolution, that of the French Revolution. In his short text, The 18th Brumaire of Louis Bonaparte, Marx's historical analysis can help us understand how his theory bears out in practice. So let's start with a historical timeline of the French Revolution. In 1789 was the first French Revolution, when the bourgeoisie overthrew the monarchy, the ruling Bourbon dynasty. On November 9, 1799, the military general Napoleon Bonaparte overthrew the established constitutional government that was set up by the bourgeoisie, and he held a coup d'etat. This was known as the 18th Brumaire. The years from 1799 to 1815 were known as the Napoleonic era, when General Napoleon Bonaparte was in power. And then in 1815, the Bourbon dynasty was restored until 1848. On February 24, 1848, there was a popular uprising against Louis Philippe, the representative of the Bourbon dynasty. In May, there was the establishment of a bourgeois republic, the Constituent National Assembly. In June, there was a proletarian uprising against this bourgeois republic, but this proletarian uprising was repressed. On December 10, 1848, Louis Bonaparte was elected president of the bourgeois republic. Louis Bonaparte, who was Napoleon Bonaparte's nephew, carried out another military coup d'etat on December 2, 1851. Marx is interested to understand how does a bourgeois revolution bring us to this point of military coup. In order to understand the trajectory of the bourgeois revolution, Marx says that we have to understand some of the contending forces in the National Assembly. There were the Legitimists, who were the landed property owners, part of the old Bourbon dynasty, the monarchy. There were the Orleanists, part of the new industrial capital class, and also part of the Orleans dynasty. There were the middle classes, and then there were the lower classes that consisted of the workers, the proletariat, that consisted of the Lumpenproletariat. This is a term that Marx uses to refer to those unemployed on the fringes of society, those excluded from the organized working class. There were also the peasants and the army. So Marx's writing is an analysis of what happens to each of these forces during the course of the revolution. The 1851 coup could only happen because the alliance between middle and upper classes had fallen apart, and the lower classes had been neutralized. There was massive repression against the proletariat. On pages 601 to 602, he talks about the workers' insurgency and the 3,000 workers that were killed, as well as 15,000 who were exiled. This repression prepared the ground for the establishment of the bourgeois republic. Marx argues that the Lumpenproletariat were bought out. Within these forces, the peasantry occupy a peculiar position for Marx. He argues that they are deluded. Bonaparte convinces the peasants that he represents their interests. Marx argues that unlike the working class, the peasantry are not capable of self-representation. Under the First French Revolution, the peasants were transformed from vassals into freeholders. They were no longer bound to the feudal lords, but now gave their allegiance to Napoleon. He set up mortgage banks, and he helped to give them property ownership. But Marx argues that peasants were turned into small landholders and that they would be gradually impoverished through mortgage payments and taxes until they were forced to join the proletariat. So how does this historical analysis fit with Marx's outline of bourgeois revolution that he gives us in the Communist Manifesto? Well, there are several points that we can see. One is that bourgeois defeat of the feudal nobility is not final. We can see that there's a move back and forth from the bourgeoisie to the military general to the bourgeoisie, and with even some contestation from the proletariat, but that the bourgeois defeat does not happen in one step. Secondly, Marx shows how the feudal nobility and the bourgeoisie can actually become allies. So Louis Philippe, who ruled together with sections of the commercial bourgeoisie, is an example of this kind of alliance. Therefore, the bourgeoisie is not always a revolutionary class in the way that Marx portrayed them in the Communist Manifesto. Marx shows that the peasantry do not necessarily disappear because of the allegiance that they gave to Napoleon due to all of his policies of mortgage banks and property ownership. They actually became the basis for a new and more regressive order. And finally, the production of two main classes that Marx had described in the Communist Manifesto is actually more complicated. We see the emergence of several different forces. We see the continuing existence of older forces, and we see the alliances between different forces in ways that prevent the kind of clear interests of bourgeoisie and proletariat emerging.